it's clear that the party and a lot of its leaders came out of that same milieu. That's what I try to show.
Now, what about Hitler himself? He's coming of age during this period. He's starting to get involved in politics at this time. He's being exposed to these ideas. To what extent does he end up believing a lot of this stuff?
Right. So, this is a complicated question. I often say at this point that Hitler was kind of the perfect representative of the Nazi relationship to these ideas. He was not as authentically invested in them as someone like Himmler or Hess, important Nazi leaders who really believed in a lot of this, or at least wanted to experiment with occult and border scientific practices, not just privately, but sometimes through the state. But he was probably more authentically interested in some of these, or at least exploiting them, than maybe Reinhard Heydrich, who was the head of the security service and just hated any sectarian ideas. If you weren't just a devout Nazi because Nazism was awesome, he didn't trust you. So whether you were a Catholic, a Jehovah's Witness, or an astrologer, Heydrich went after you. So Hitler is probably somewhere in the middle, meaning he has, in a lot of ways, rhetorical kind of moments where he clearly invokes an idea that comes from this milieu or sounds a lot like Theosophy, or even explicitly talks about world ice theory and how convincing it is. But he's never as systematically interested in those ideas as someone like Himmler, who has his research institute have whole divisions that research these things. Or Rudolf Hess, who keeps trying to, he opens health institutes that are dedicated to natural healing and occult and border scientific medicine. So there's a spectrum there, and I would say Hitler's somewhere in the middle.
Okay, so more of an involvement with these ideas, not quite the enthusiast of Himmler and some of his other associates.
Right, but not skeptical enough to ever ban them. So many of the Nazis who criticized traditional occult doctrines or ideas were not, in fact, rejecting the practices. They were rejecting the groups out of which they came, or the individuals in charge, or making very fine distinctions in nomenclature. So if you called it scientific astrology, or if you called it radiesthesia, then the Navy or the SS could experiment with it. If you called it just astrology, or if you called it dowsing, then it didn't sound as scientific, and they'd say, oh, we don't believe in that. So like many occultists, this is a very important point. It took me a while in my research to realize the commonalities here. Occultists in the modern period always want to claim, especially the border scientists who really want credit from other scientists, that what they're doing is scientific, but the other people, someone with the palm reader, the tarot card woman on the corner, they're of course charlatans. We can prove it. But what we do when we read the stars is science. And the Nazis have the same internal debate. So when it looks superficially like the Nazis are prosecuting or persecuting people who are occultist, what I find is they're actually trying to control them or sort them into those who are acceptable because they're Aryan and support the regime and scientific, and those who are seen as Jewish and consumerist and commercial. It's not that they're rejecting the ideas per se and the practices per se. And that's really important because if you don't look closely at the context, it looks like the Nazis, like they're hostile to almost everything, right? I mean, they try to control everything, are hostile to occultism. But they're really very nuanced towards it.